February 8th, 1587, a great hall in Fotheringhay Castle, a woman dressed in crimson, the color of Catholic martyrdom, kneels before an executioner's block. She is 44 years old. She has been a queen since she was 6 days old. And now, after 19 years of imprisonment, she is about to die. But here's the question that still haunts history. Was Mary, Queen of Scots, executed for treason or for the crime of being born too royal, too Catholic, and too dangerous to live? 2 queens, 2 kingdoms, 1 throne, and a rivalry so deadly that it would end with a queen's head rolling across the floor of an English castle. This is the story of Mary Stuart, a woman who wore 3 crowns, married 3 kings, and was betrayed by everyone she trusted. A queen who lost everything, including her head. Welcome to Dark Ages Chronicles. Today, we descend into one of history's darkest royal tragedies. Mary Stuart was born on December 8, 1542, at Linlithgow Palace in Scotland. Her father, King James V, died 6 days later, some say of grief after Scotland's defeat at the Battle of Solway Moss. Others whispered darker causes. At less than a week old, Mary became Queen of Scotland. But her destiny was far grander and far more dangerous than that single crown. Through her grandmother, Margaret Tudor, Mary had a legitimate claim to the English throne. Through her mother, Mary of Guise, she was connected to the most powerful Catholic family in France. She was, quite literally, born into a web of royal intrigue that would eventually strangle her. At 5 years old, she was sent to France for her own protection. Scotland was a brutal, divided land torn between Protestant reformers and Catholic nobles. England's King Henry VIII wanted to force a marriage between Mary and his son Edward, a plan so aggressive it became known as the Rough Wooing, complete with invasion and massacre. France offered safety, but safety always comes with a price. Mary grew up in the glittering French court, educated in languages, music, poetry, and the deadly art of royal politics. She was beautiful, charming, intelligent. Everything a Renaissance queen should be. At 15, she married Francis, the Dauphin of France. When his father died in 1559, Mary became Queen of France as well as Queen of Scotland, 2 crowns before she was 17 years old. But fate is cruel to those who rise too high, too fast. Francis died after barely a year on the throne, probably from an ear infection that became an abscess. Suddenly, Mary was a widow, a queen without a kingdom, and France, now ruled by Francis's mother, Catherine de' Medici, had no use for a widowed queen consort. Mary had no choice. In 1561, at 18 years old, she returned to Scotland, a country she barely remembered, a land that had changed dramatically in her absence. Scotland had become Protestant. The Reformation had swept through like wildfire, led by the thundering preacher John Knox, who despised Mary's Catholicism and frankly despised the idea of any woman ruling at all. He called it monstrous for women to hold power over men. Mary arrived to a hostile land, but she played her cards carefully. She was tolerant, diplomatic, willing to compromise. She attended Protestant services while maintaining her private Catholic faith. For a few years, she balanced on the knife's edge between religious factions. But Mary needed to marry again. An unmarried queen was vulnerable, politically and personally. And here's where everything began to unravel. In 1565, Mary married her cousin Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. He was tall, handsome, and had his own claim to the English throne. Together, their claim would be even stronger. It seemed like a brilliant political match. It was a disaster. Darnley was vain, jealous, alcoholic, and violent. He demanded to be crowned King of Scotland, not just the Queen's consort. When Mary refused, he turned vindictive. Mary had a private secretary, an Italian musician named David Rizzio. He was charming, cultured, and Mary enjoyed his company. Rumors spread. Were they lovers? Almost certainly not. But in the poisonous atmosphere of the Scottish court, rumors were as deadly as daggers. And then, on March 9, 1566, daggers became literal. Mary was 6 months pregnant, dining with Rizzio and friends in her private chambers at Holyrood Palace. Suddenly, Darnley burst in with a group of armed conspirators. They dragged Rizzio from the room, screaming, and stabbed him 56 times just outside Mary's door. They wanted her to hear it. They wanted her to miscarry. She didn't. 3 months later, she gave birth to a son, James. But she never forgave Darnley, and neither did history. What happened next remains one of history's greatest mysteries. On February 10, 1567, the house where Darnley was staying in Edinburgh exploded. His body was found in the garden, not burned but strangled. Someone had murdered him, then tried to cover it up with an explosion. Who did it? The prime suspect was James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell, a powerful Scottish noble, possibly Mary's lover, and definitely her protector. Within 3 months, Mary married Bothwell. The timing was catastrophic. The Scottish nobles turned against her. Protestant preachers denounced her as an adulteress and murderess. Some claimed she'd helped plan Darnley's death. Others said Bothwell had forced her into marriage after abducting and raping her. The truth? Lost to history and propaganda. What we know is this: Mary's reign in Scotland was over. In July 1567, she was forced to abdicate in favor of her infant son. Bothwell fled to Denmark, where he eventually died in prison, possibly insane. And Mary, she made the worst decision of her life. She fled to England, seeking protection from her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I faced an impossible dilemma. Mary was her cousin, a fellow queen, and by the laws of hospitality and royalty, she deserved protection. But Mary was also Catholic, had a legitimate claim to Elizabeth's throne, and was a magnet for every Catholic conspiracy in England. Elizabeth couldn't let Mary go. She might raise an army in France or Spain and invade England. But she couldn't formally recognize Mary's claim either, and she certainly couldn't execute her without proof of treason. So Elizabeth did the only thing she could. She kept Mary prisoner for 19 years. 19 years. Think about that. Nearly 2 decades of captivity, moved from castle to castle, always watched, always isolated, always hoping for rescue that never came. At first, Mary's imprisonment was relatively comfortable. She had servants, could embroider, could write letters, but she was never free. And every year the conditions grew harsher as more plots swirled around her name. The Ridolfi Plot, the Throckmorton Plot, the Parry Plot. Catholic conspirators across Europe schemed to free Mary, assassinate Elizabeth, and place the Catholic Queen on the English throne. Mary may not have initiated these plots, but she certainly knew about them. She wrote letters in cipher, smuggled in beer barrels, and hidden in various creative ways. Then came the Babington Plot of 1586. Anthony Babington, a young Catholic nobleman, planned to murder Elizabeth and crown Mary. He wrote to Mary outlining the entire conspiracy. And Mary, desperate after years of captivity, wrote back. She approved the plot. She endorsed assassination. But here's the thing. Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, had intercepted every letter. He'd even forged an additional postscript to trick the conspirators into revealing all their co-conspirators. It was a trap, and Mary walked right into it. In October 1586, Mary was put on trial for treason. She defended herself brilliantly, arguing that as the Scottish queen, she couldn't commit treason against England, that the evidence was forged, that she'd been entrapped. It didn't matter. The verdict was predetermined. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. But Elizabeth hesitated. For 3 months, she refused to sign the death warrant. Executing an anointed queen set a terrifying precedent. If a queen could be legally killed, then no monarch was truly safe. It violated the divine right of kings, the sacred bond between God and royalty. Finally, in February 1587, Elizabeth signed. Some say her advisors tricked her into it. Others say she knew exactly what she was doing and simply wanted plausible deniability. On February 8, 1587, Mary Stuart walked into the great hall of Fotheringhay Castle. Mary wore a black gown over a crimson petticoat, the liturgical color of martyrdom and in the Catholic faith. She was calm, dignified, even serene. She'd spent the night praying and writing farewell letters. She forgave her executioner, as was customary. She prayed aloud in Latin. Then she placed her head on the block. The executioner was nervous. The first blow struck the back of her head. The second blow severed her neck, but not completely. He had to saw through the remaining sinew with the axe. When he lifted her head to show the crowd, her lips were still moving in prayer. Then something bizarre happened. Her auburn hair, which the executioner was holding, came away in his hand. It was a wig. Mary's real hair, beneath it, had turned completely gray during her captivity. As her head fell to the floor, her small dog, a Skye Terrier that had hidden in her skirts, ran from beneath her dress and refused to leave her body. When Elizabeth heard the news, she was reportedly furious. She claimed she'd never intended the warrant to be carried out, that her advisors had acted without her knowledge. She imprisoned the man who delivered the warrant and publicly mourned her dear sister. It was political theater. Elizabeth had wanted Mary dead for years. She just didn't want to be blamed for it. But Mary had the last laugh in a way. Her son James, raised Protestant in Scotland, became King James VI of Scotland. When Elizabeth died childless in 1603, James inherited the English throne as well, becoming James I of England. The Stuart dynasty that Mary had fought so hard to preserve ended up ruling both kingdoms. The woman Elizabeth had executed to protect her throne was the mother of Elizabeth's successor. History has a cruel sense of irony. So who was Mary Stuart really? History has painted her in 1,000 different shades. To Catholics, she was a martyr, a pious queen murdered by heretics for her faith. To Protestants, she was a scheming adulteress who plotted to kill Elizabeth. To Romantics, she was a tragic heroine destroyed by forces beyond her control. To feminists, she was a woman trying to navigate a world designed to crush powerful females. The truth? Probably all of these, and none of them. Mary was brilliant but politically naive. She was educated in the sophisticated French court, but unprepared for the brutal realities of Scottish politics. She made terrible decisions about men. Darnley was a disaster, Bothwell possibly worse, but she was also trapped in an impossible situation from birth, a pawn in games played by more powerful forces. She spent more than a third of her life in prison. She was betrayed by husbands, nobles, advisors, and ultimately by her own cousin. She watched her power stripped away piece by piece until all she had left was her dignity. And even that, they tried to take from her on the scaffold. But she never broke. At her execution, witnesses reported she was calm, even joyful, believing she was about to become a martyr for her faith. In her final hours, she was more regal than she'd been in years. Perhaps that's her real legacy, not the plots, not the scandals, not the mistakes, but the strength to face death with grace when everything else had been taken from her. 500 years later, we're still asking the same questions about Mary, Queen of Scots. Was she a traitor who plotted to murder Elizabeth? Or was she a desperate prisoner who'd run out of options? Did she help murder her husband Darnley? Or was she a victim of Bothwell's manipulation? Was she a brilliant queen brought down by sexism and religious hatred? Or was she a political disaster who made fatal mistakes at every turn? Here's the real question, though. If Mary Stuart had been born a man, a king instead of a queen, would history remember her differently? Would her political mistakes have been forgiven as the errors of youth? Would her marriages have been seen as strategic alliances rather than scandalous affairs? Or was Mary's greatest crime not treason, not murder, not conspiracy, but simply being a woman with power in an age that couldn't tolerate such a thing? Elizabeth I never married, never had children, and died alone. Mary Stuart lost everything, but left a son who united two kingdoms. So tell me, who really won? This has been Dark Ages Chronicles. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Was Mary, Queen of Scots, guilty of treason? Or was she the last pawn in a deadly royal game that was rigged against her from the start? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more dark stories from history's bloodiest pages. Next time, we'll explore another tale of betrayal, power, and the terrible price of wearing a crown. Until then, remember, in the Game of Thrones, even queens can become pieces to be sacrificed.